Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel New Horizon and watched the alien ships surround Earth's space stations. The year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the galactic community for only 50 years. Jake felt his heart sink as he counted the massive warships that belonged to the Galactic Council. There were hundreds of them, and they all pointed their weapons at human settlements in space. The Council's message came through clearly on all frequencies. Admiral Lisa Kane received it first at the military headquarters on Luna. She read the ultimatum with growing anger and disbelief. The galactic leaders had decided that humanity was too dangerous to remain among the stars. They said humans were too aggressive and refused to follow the rules that kept peace in the galaxy. The Council demanded that all humans return to Earth and never leave their solar system again. Lisa Kane had spent her entire adult life serving in Earth's space fleet. She had fought alongside alien allies against pirates and hostile forces. She had saved alien lives and earned their respect through countless battles. Now those same alien species voted to banish humanity from the stars forever. She felt betrayed by beings she had once called friends. Dr. Alex Chen worked frantically in his laboratory on the orbital research station above Earth. As the leading expert on alien biology and culture, he had been studying the Council's decision patterns for weeks. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The aliens were not just planning to exile humanity. They intended to erase every trace that humans had ever existed among the stars. Alex accessed the galactic databases and watched in horror as human records began disappearing. Scientific discoveries made by human researchers vanished from academic journals. Trade agreements with human companies were deleted from commercial archives. Even personal friendships between humans and aliens were being wiped from social networks and communication logs. The systematic erasure had already begun. Captain Maya Rodriguez commanded the civilian evacuation fleet. Her ships carried families, children, and elderly humans back to Earth from colonies throughout the solar system. Many of these people had been born on Mars or the moons of Jupiter. They had never seen Earth except in pictures. Now they were forced to abandon the only homes they had ever known. The alien enforcement fleets made sure no human ship tried to escape to other star systems. Energy barriers surrounded every possible exit route from the solar system. Advanced alien technology created an invisible prison that trapped humanity inside their own small corner of space. The barriers were so powerful that even radio signals could not pass through them. Maya watched her sensor screens as the last group of alien diplomats left Earth's orbit. Behind them came the final wave of alien civilians who had been working or studying in human space. Some of them looked sad to leave. A few even tried to send farewell messages to human friends. But the Council's orders were absolute. No alien could remain in contact with humanity. The automated Sentinel platforms took their positions around the solar system's edge. These massive machines would watch for any human attempt to break through the barriers. They carried weapons, powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. Their artificial intelligence systems were programmed with one simple command: keep the humans contained. Dr. Chen made one last desperate attempt to preserve some record of human achievement. He tried to upload important scientific data to neutral archives in distant galaxies, but the Council's cyber warfare specialists were too fast. They had already infected every network connection with viruses designed to delete human information. Within hours, it would be as if humans had never existed among the stars. Admiral Kane gathered her remaining fleet commanders for a final meeting. The military leaders from Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies all wore grim expressions. They had prepared for many kinds of war, but never for this type of defeat. How do you fight an enemy that simply erases you from existence instead of destroying you directly? The Alien Council's reasoning was coldly logical. Humans were unpredictable and refused to follow established galactic laws. They asked too many questions and challenged ancient traditions. They developed new technologies without asking permission and formed alliances that threatened old power structures. Rather than risk a war that might spread across the galaxy, the Council chose to simply remove the problem. Jake Morrison received the final transmission from his alien friend Zor Malik, a being he had served with for over 10 years. The message was brief and filled with regret. Zor Malik explained that he had voted against the exile but was outnumbered by others who feared human influence. He promised to remember their friendship, even if the official records were destroyed. As Earth's orbital defenses powered down in surrender, Jake realized this was not just about military defeat. The aliens were stealing something far more valuable than territory or resources. They were stealing humanity's place in history itself. Future generations of aliens would never know that humans had once walked among the stars, had contributed to galactic civilization, had been friends and allies to dozens of species. The last alien ship disappeared beyond the barrier wall, leaving only the automated guardians. Earth's blue and green surface looked peaceful from space, but Jake knew that billions of humans now stared up at a sky that had become their prison. They were alone again, cut off from the vast galaxy that had rejected them. Maya Rodriguez landed, her evacuation ship at the New York spaceport, and watched as families struggled to adapt to life on the planet their ancestors had left behind. Children who had grown up in low gravity stumbled in Earth's heavy atmosphere. Adults who had spent careers working with alien technology now faced unemployment in a world suddenly isolated from galactic trade and knowledge. The Great Erasure was complete within 72 hours. Every database, every archive, every personal memory that mentioned human contact with galactic civilization was systematically destroyed or altered. Humanity became a ghost story that no one could prove had ever been real. The galaxy moved forward as if the previous 50 years of human participation had never happened. Colonel Ryan Baker had never seen the stars beyond the solar system barrier, but he dreamed about them every night. Born 15 years after the Great Exile, Ryan grew up hearing stories from the older generation about the time when humans walked freely among alien civilizations. His parents had been children during the evacuation, and they filled his young mind with tales of distant worlds and strange creatures that once called humans their friends. 50 years had passed since the Galactic Council erected their prison, walls around humanity's solar system. The automated sentinels still floated at the edge of known space, their weapons trained inward to prevent any human escape. But Ryan and his generation had learned to see these barriers not as walls keeping them in, but as protection, keeping everyone else out while humanity evolved into something the galaxy had never imagined. Dr. Emma Wright stood in her laboratory, deep beneath the surface of Mars, surrounded by technologies that would have horrified the alien civilizations that once ruled over human development. The Galactic Council had banned genetic enhancement, artificial intelligence research, and quantum manipulation experiments. They claimed such technologies were too dangerous for younger species to handle safely. But with no aliens watching over their shoulders, human scientists had spent 5 decades pushing every boundary that had once been forbidden. Emma's current project involved merging human consciousness with artificial intelligence in ways that created entirely new forms of thinking. Her volunteers were not becoming less human, but more than human. They retained their creativity, emotions, and individual personalities, while gaining the processing power and memory capacity of advanced computers. The test subjects could solve problems that would have taken teams of specialists years to complete. General Patricia Davis commanded Earth's new defense fleets from her headquarters on the Moon. Her ships looked nothing like the vessels humanity had used during their brief time in galactic society. These new warships were grown rather than built, using biotechnology that blended living tissue with mechanical components. The hulls could heal themselves when damaged, and the weapons adapted their output based on whatever threat they faced. Patricia's crews were as unusual as their ships. Each vessel was operated by a hybrid team of enhanced humans and artificial intelligences that shared thoughts and reactions through quantum communication links. The boundary between biological and digital consciousness had blurred until it became meaningless. Her fleet could think and react faster than any purely organic or purely artificial system. The general often wondered what the Galactic Council would think of humanity's military now. They had exiled humans for being too aggressive and unpredictable. But isolation had not made humanity more peaceful. Instead, it had given them time to become far more dangerous than the Council had ever feared. Patricia's forces could probably defeat the combined fleets of 6 alien civilizations, but there was no way to test that theory while trapped behind the barrier. Engineer Carlos Mendez supervised the construction yards hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. His teams were building something that the galaxy's greatest minds would have declared impossible: generation ships capable of traveling between dimensions rather than through normal space. If humanity could not break through the barriers around their solar system, perhaps they could find a way to go around them entirely. Carlos had been working on the Dimensional Fold project for over 20 years. The basic theory came from human scientists who studied the barrier technology that kept them imprisoned. By analyzing how the aliens bent space around the solar system, human researchers learned to bend it in other directions. The first successful test had opened a tiny portal that lasted only microseconds, but it proved the concept could work. The prototype ships in Carlos's construction yards were larger than anything humanity had ever built. They needed massive power systems to tear holes in reality itself, and sophisticated navigation computers to avoid getting lost between dimensions. Most importantly, they required crews capable of thinking in ways that could handle the strange physics of interdimensional travel. Dr. Wright's enhanced humans were perfect for this task. Their hybrid consciousness could process information that would drive normal minds insane, while their retained humanity gave them the intuition needed to navigate by instinct when instruments failed. Each generation ship would carry 10,000 colonists in suspended animation, ready to establish new human settlements in distant galaxies where the Council's influence could never reach them. Ryan Baker's Military Intelligence Division had spent decades analyzing every scrap of information about the galaxy beyond their prison. They studied old transmissions, decoded alien languages, and built detailed maps of political boundaries and trade routes. When humanity finally returned to galactic society, they would know more about their former captors than those aliens knew about themselves. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a galaxy that had grown complacent during humanity's absence. The major civilizations had settled into comfortable routines with little innovation or change. They followed ancient laws and traditions without questioning whether those rules still made sense. The dynamic energy that humans brought to every situation had been completely removed from galactic culture. Ryan's analyst predicted that this stagnation would eventually lead to crisis. History showed that civilizations which stopped adapting eventually faced challenges they could not handle. When that moment arrived, the galaxy might desperately need the very creativity and unpredictability that had caused them to exile humanity in the first place. Patricia Davis received the first successful probe transmission from beyond the barrier after 47 years of isolation. One of Carlos's dimensional fold devices had finally punched through the alien barriers and sent back images of the galaxy they had been cut off from. The pictures showed space lanes filled with the same alien ships using the same old technologies. Nothing seemed to have changed since humanity's exile. More disturbing were the historical records the probe had downloaded from public archives. The systematic erasure of human involvement in galactic history was complete and thorough. Even major events that had been shaped by human participation were now attributed entirely to alien actions. It was as if humanity had never existed among the stars at all. Emma Wright analyzed the probe's data about current alien psychology and culture. The species that had once known humans seemed somehow diminished, less creative and flexible than the records from 50 years ago suggested. Removing humanity from their society had not just erased human history, it had apparently reduced the intellectual and cultural vitality of galactic civilization itself. The realization gave humanity's leaders a new perspective on their situation. They were not prisoners waiting to be rescued or refugees hoping to return home. They had become something unique and powerful during their isolation, something the galaxy had never seen before. When the time came to reveal themselves again, they would not be asking for acceptance as junior partners in galactic society. Carlos Mendez watched the final generation ship disappear into interdimensional space, carrying its cargo of enhanced human colonists toward a distant galaxy. Humanity was no longer trapped in a single solar system. They were spreading across the universe in ways the Galactic Council could never detect or prevent. The exile that was meant to contain human influence was actually helping it spread farther than ever before. Supreme Coordinator Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen in the Galactic Council chamber and watched another star system die. The ancient enemy known as the Devourers had returned after sleeping in dark space for over 1,000 years. Their black ships moved like living creatures through the void, consuming everything in their path with a hunger that seemed endless and unstoppable. Veltar had ruled the Council for 3 decades and thought he had seen every possible threat the galaxy could face: pirates, rogue artificial intelligences, natural disasters, even wars between major civilizations had all been handled through careful diplomacy and measured military responses. But the Devourers were different. They did not want territory or resources or political power. They simply wanted to consume all life until nothing remained. Fleet Commander Zor-On watched his tactical displays with growing despair as the Devourer fleet advanced toward the core worlds. His combined armada represented the strongest military force the galaxy had assembled in centuries. Ships from dozens of civilizations flew in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for battle. But every engagement with the Devourers had ended in complete disaster for the galactic forces. The enemy's technology was beyond anything the current galactic civilizations could understand or counter. Devourer ships seemed to learn from each attack, adapting their defenses to make the same weapons useless in future battles. Energy beams that destroyed one enemy vessel would pass harmlessly through the next identical ship. Missiles that crippled Devourer craft in the morning became ineffective by afternoon. Worse than their technological advantages was the psychological effect the Devourers had on organic crews. Fleet personnel reported feeling overwhelming dread and hopelessness when facing the enemy ships. Some captains abandoned their vessels without orders. Others turned their weapons on their own allies in fits of inexplicable madness. The Devourers seemed to feed on fear itself, growing stronger as their enemies grew weaker. Dr. Kethmora worked frantically in the deepest archives of the Council Library, searching through records that had not been accessed in centuries. As the galaxy's leading historian, she had been tasked with finding any information about the previous Devourer invasion. The old record spoke of a great victory 1,000 years ago, but crucial details about how that victory was achieved had been lost or corrupted over time. The historian's research had revealed disturbing patterns in the galactic archives. Large sections of historical data showed signs of deliberate alteration or deletion. Important events seemed to have key participants missing from the records. Most puzzling were references to an unknown species that appeared briefly in some documents, but was completely absent from others covering the same time periods. Kethmora found fragments of corrupted files that mentioned beings called humans, who had somehow played a crucial role in defeating the Devourers during their previous invasion. But every attempt to learn more about these humans led to dead ends. Their contributions had been systematically removed from the historical record, leaving only tantalizing hints that something important had been erased. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session as 3 more star systems fell to the Devourer advance. Representatives from 100 different species argued desperately about strategies and tactics, but their traditional approaches had already proven useless. The enemy adapted faster than the Council could change its methods, making every new plan obsolete before it could be implemented. Ambassador Thisara listened to her colleagues debate the crisis and felt a growing sense of futility. She had studied military history for decades and recognized the signs of an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional means. The Devourers were not just technologically superior. They seemed to understand galactic military thinking better than the galactic forces understood themselves. The unity that had held the Council together for centuries began to crack under the pressure of repeated defeats. Member species started blaming each other for the crisis. Ancient grudges resurfaced as panic spread through the core worlds. Some civilizations withdrew their fleets to defend their home systems, weakening the combined forces even further. Supreme Coordinator Veltar realized that the galaxy was facing its greatest crisis, not just because of the external threat, but because of internal weaknesses that the Devourers exploited. The galactic civilizations had grown comfortable with their established ways of thinking and fighting. They had eliminated sources of unpredictability and innovation in the name of maintaining order and stability. Dr. Kethmora made a breakthrough. when she discovered a hidden archive that had somehow escaped the systematic data purges. The files contained tactical analyses from the previous Devourer War, written in languages that were no longer used by any current galactic species. But the content was clear enough to translate. The key to victory had involved thinking in ways that the Devourers could not predict or counter. The ancient records described an alliance between organic and artificial intelligences that created new forms of consciousness capable of random and irrational decision-making. This hybrid thinking had confused the Devourers, who fed on fear and predictable responses. When faced with minds that could be simultaneously logical and chaotic, the enemy had lost their psychological advantages. Fleet Commander Zoran studied the historical data and realized why current galactic forces were failing so completely. Every species in the galaxy had evolved toward either purely organic thinking or purely artificial intelligence. The rigid separation between biological and digital consciousness that the Council enforced made it impossible to create the hybrid minds that had once defeated the Devourers. The revelation led to desperate attempts to modify existing military technologies and tactics. Research teams worked around the clock to develop new types of artificial intelligence that could think more randomly. Military commanders tried to train their organic crews to make decisions based on intuition rather than logic, but these efforts produced only marginal improvements against an enemy that continued to adapt and evolve. Ambassador Thaisara proposed the unthinkable during a closed council session. Perhaps the galaxy needed to search for the lost humans whose contributions had been erased from history. If these beings had once possessed the type of hybrid thinking that could defeat the Devourers, they might represent the galaxy's only hope for survival. The proposal triggered fierce debate among the council members. Many species had been involved in the decision to exile humanity 75 years earlier, though few could remember the specific reasons for that action. The systematic erasure of human-related records had been so thorough that even the council members who had voted for the exile could no longer recall why they had considered humans dangerous. Supreme Coordinator Veltar accessed the deepest security archives and found references to a quarantine zone that had been maintained for decades in a remote sector of the galaxy. The automated systems guarding this region were programmed with the highest security priorities, but their mission parameters had been classified so deeply that even he could not access the details without unanimous council approval. As another major fleet was destroyed by the advancing Devourers, the council faced a terrible choice. They could continue fighting with their current methods and watch galactic civilization slowly consumed, or they could investigate the mysterious quarantine zone and risk unleashing whatever threat had been contained there for 3/4 of a century. Dr. Kethmora presented her final research summary to the council leadership. The evidence strongly suggested that the exiled humans possessed mental capabilities that were fundamentally different from any current galactic species. If they had survived their isolation and maintained their unique psychological traits, they might indeed represent the key to defeating the Devourers. The decision was made with the Devourer fleet only days away from the first core worlds. A small expedition would be sent to investigate the human quarantine zone and determine whether the ancient enemy of galactic order might now be its only salvation. Ambassador Thaisara commanded the small diplomatic vessel that approached the mysterious quarantine zone at the edge of galactic space. Her ship carried emergency override codes that had not been used in over 70 years, along with a crew of the galaxy's best xenobiologists and historians. None of them knew what they would find in the region that had been sealed away for so long that most galactic citizens had forgotten it existed. The automated sentinel platforms that had guarded the quarantine zone for decades suddenly powered down as Thaisara's ship transmitted the Council's desperate authorization codes. The massive weapons that had kept some unknown threat contained for 3 generations slowly retracted their targeting systems and allowed the diplomatic vessel to pass through the barrier wall. What lay beyond the energy barrier shocked every member of the expedition crew. Instead of finding a dead system populated by primitive survivors, they discovered a thriving interplanetary civilization that had grown far beyond anything in their databases. Massive space stations orbited every planet and moon, connected by streams of traffic that moved with precision and efficiency that surpassed even the core worlds. Captain Nathan Brooks received the alien diplomatic vessel in the orbital headquarters above Earth. His appearance startled Thyssara's team because he was clearly human in basic biology, but enhanced with technologies that the Galactic Council had banned as too dangerous for younger species. Cybernetic implants integrated seamlessly with his nervous system, and biomechanical interfaces allowed him to communicate directly with artificial intelligence systems. Nathan's greeting was polite, but cautious, as he welcomed the first alien visitors humanity had seen in 75 years. Behind him stood representatives of what he called new humanity, beings who retained recognizable human features, but possessed capabilities that seemed to blur the line between organic and artificial intelligence. Their eyes held depths of knowledge and processing power that made the alien visitors deeply uncomfortable. Dr. Rachel Morgan led the human scientific team that presented evidence to the Galactic expedition. During their forced isolation, humanity's xenoarchaeologists had continued studying ancient civilizations and had made discoveries that the galaxy's own historians had missed. The Devourers were indeed ancient enemies, but the galactic records about their previous defeat had been deliberately corrupted by someone who wanted future generations to forget the lessons of that war. Rachel showed the aliens holographic displays of archaeological sites on worlds that had been consumed by Devourers over 1,000 years ago. The excavations revealed battle patterns and weapon signatures that did not match any technology used by current galactic civilizations. The previous victory against the Devourers had involved forces and tactics that had been systematically erased. From official history, the human researchers had also discovered why the Devourers were so effective against modern galactic forces. These entities fed on predictable thought patterns and emotional responses like fear and desperation. They grew stronger when facing enemies who thought in purely logical or purely chaotic ways, but they could not process or consume minds that combined organic intuition with artificial precision in unpredictable combinations. Thyssara listened to the human explanations with growing amazement and horror. The species that the Galactic Council had exiled for being too unpredictable and dangerous had spent their isolation developing exactly the type of hybrid thinking that could defeat the ancient enemy. Humanity had become the weapon the galaxy needed, but only after being cast out and forced to evolve in isolation. Nathan Brooks explained humanity's terms for providing assistance against the Devourers. They would help save galactic civilization, but the galaxy would have to acknowledge the crimes committed against humanity and restore their rightful place among the stars. More importantly, the rigid laws that separated organic and artificial intelligence would have to be abolished to allow other species to develop the hybrid consciousness needed for long-term defense against such enemies. The human military demonstration that followed left the alien visitors speechless. Captain Laura Thompson commanded a single human warship in a mock battle against multiple computer-simulated Devourer vessels. Her crew operated as a unified organism, their enhanced minds linked through quantum communication while retaining individual creativity and decision-making abilities. Thompson's ship moved through the battle simulation in ways that defied conventional tactics. It would respond to threats with perfect logical precision one moment, then make seemingly random decisions that confused the enemy targeting systems the next moment. The simulated Devourers, programmed with behavioral patterns from real encounters, could not adapt to tactics that were simultaneously rational and irrational. Dr. Rachel Morgan revealed the most disturbing discovery from humanity's research. The systematic erasure of human achievements from galactic history had not been an accident or simple prejudice. Someone had deliberately wanted the galaxy to forget the lessons learned during the previous Devourer War. This same entity had manipulated the Council into exiling humanity just decades before the Devourers were scheduled to return from their 1,000-year dormancy. The evidence suggested that the Devourers had agents or allies working within galactic civilization itself. These collaborators had spent centuries weakening the galaxy's defenses by promoting rigid thinking patterns and eliminating sources of unpredictability and innovation. The exile of humanity had been part of a long-term plan to ensure that the galaxy would be defenseless when the ancient enemy returned. Ambassador Thyssara transmitted humanity's findings back to the Galactic Council, along with urgent recommendations for immediate action. But the response from the core worlds was fragmented and confused. Many council members refused to believe that their predecessors had been manipulated by enemy agents. Others argued that accepting help from humanity would legitimize the technologies and thinking patterns that the council had spent centuries trying to eliminate. Captain Nathan Brooks observed the galactic political crisis with the detached analysis that his enhanced consciousness allowed. He had expected this reaction from species that had grown comfortable with their limitations and fearful of change. The same rigid thinking that made them vulnerable to the devourers also made them resistant to accepting the solutions that could save them. Dr. Ben Carter, humanity's leading expert on devourer psychology, joined the discussions with the alien expedition. His research during the isolation years had focused on understanding how the ancient enemy processed different types of consciousness. The devourers were essentially psychic parasites that fed on mental energy, but they could only consume thoughts that followed predictable patterns. Ben explained that the devourers had evolved to prey on the type of civilizations that dominated the current galaxy, species that thought in either purely organic or purely artificial ways. Organic minds followed emotional and instinctual patterns that the devourers found delicious. Artificial minds followed logical patterns that were equally predictable and consumable. But hybrid minds that seamlessly blended both types of thinking were toxic to the enemy consciousness. The revelation that humanity had become a biological weapon against the devourers created complex emotions among the alien visitors. They needed human help to survive, but accepting that help would require abandoning the fundamental principles that had guided galactic civilization for centuries. The very chaos and unpredictability that had caused them to exile humanity was now their only hope for salvation. Thesera faced the most difficult decision of her diplomatic career. She could return to the council with humanity's offer and watch her colleagues debate the matter while the devourers consumed more worlds. Or she could authorize immediate cooperation with the humans and risk being accused of exceeding her authority. The choice was between following proper procedures and saving the galaxy. As reports arrived of 3 more core worlds falling to the devourer advance, Thesera made her decision. She accepted humanity's terms on behalf of the Galactic Council and requested immediate military assistance. The species that had been erased from galactic history would return to save the civilization that had rejected them, but they would do so as equals rather than subjects. Nathan Brooks smiled as he authorized the activation of humanity's response fleet. Ships that had been built in secret during the isolation years began emerging from hidden bases throughout the solar system. Each vessel represented technologies and capabilities that the galaxy had never seen, crewed by humans who had evolved far beyond their original limitations, while retaining the essential unpredictability that made them uniquely dangerous to humanity's ancient enemies. Admiral Connor Hayes led humanity's response fleet through dimensional gates that bypassed normal space entirely. The technology that had been developed during 75 years of isolation allowed human ships to appear instantly throughout contested star systems without traveling through the intervening distance. Galaxy-wide communications networks carried reports of human vessels materializing from nowhere to engage devourer forces that had seemed unstoppable just hours before. The first major engagement took place above the industrial world of Kepler Prime, where a devourer fleet was in the process of consuming the planet's biosphere. Connor's flagship emerged from interdimensional space directly above the enemy formation, followed by 24 human warships that moved with precision that seemed impossible for vessels of their size and complexity. Captain Laura Thompson commanded the lead assault ship and felt her enhanced consciousness merge seamlessly with her vessel's artificial intelligence systems. Her crew of hybrid human AI entities shared thoughts and reactions through quantum entanglement, while retaining the individual creativity and intuition that made them unpredictable to enemy analysis. The ship itself had been grown, rather than built, its biomechanical hull capable of adapting to damage and changing its configuration during combat. The devourers responded to the human attack with their usual tactics of adaptation and psychological warfare. Their ships began analyzing human weapon signatures and adjusting their defenses accordingly. Waves of despair and terror flooded outward from the enemy vessels. attempting to trigger the fear responses that had crippled every previous galactic fleet. But Thompson's crew experienced the alien psychological attack as little more than background noise. Their enhanced minds processed the fear-inducing signals as raw data rather than emotional triggers. When individual crew members did feel moments of doubt or terror, their quantum-linked teammates immediately provided mental support and alternative perspectives that prevented panic from taking hold. The first Devourer ship to fall was destroyed, not by superior firepower, but by tactics that the enemy could not understand or predict. Thompson's vessel would fire its main weapons with perfect mathematical precision at one moment, then make seemingly random course corrections that put it in impossible positions the next moment. The Devourer targeting systems, designed to track logical or chaotic behavior patterns, could not lock onto something that was both simultaneously. Admiral Hayes coordinated the battle from his command ship, while his consciousness remained partially linked to every vessel in the human fleet. This level of coordination had been impossible during humanity's original time in galactic society, when such mind-linking technologies were forbidden as too dangerous. But isolation had given human scientists decades to perfect the integration of organic and artificial intelligence. Dr. Ben Carter observed the engagement from the fleet's mobile research laboratory. His instruments confirmed what humanity's theoretical models had predicted. The Devourers were not just confused by human tactics. They were actually being weakened by exposure to hybrid human-AI consciousness. The enemy ships began showing signs of system failures and erratic behavior, as their feeding mechanisms encountered mental patterns they could not process. The battle above Kepler Prime lasted only 6 hours, but its outcome sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the Devourer invasion began, an enemy fleet had been completely destroyed with minimal losses to the defending forces. More importantly, the human victory demonstrated tactics and technologies that could be replicated by other species willing to abandon their traditional separation of organic and artificial thinking. Captain Nicole Rodriguez led the next phase of humanity's counterattack, targeting the main Devourer supply lines that stretched back toward dark space. Her stealth ships used dimensional folding technology to strike enemy logistics bases that were supposedly protected by impenetrable defenses. The raids were surgical and devastating, cutting off the resources that the Devourer fleets needed to maintain their advance. The psychological impact of humanity's return spread throughout the galaxy, faster than official communications could travel. Worlds that had been preparing for inevitable consumption suddenly filled with hope as reports of human victories reached their populations. The species that had been erased from galactic history had returned more powerful than ever, offering salvation to the civilizations that had rejected them. But not all galactic leaders welcomed humanity's intervention. Several major species argued that accepting human help would legitimize the dangerous technologies that the Council had spent centuries trying to eliminate. They preferred to continue fighting the Devourers with traditional methods rather than risk the chaos that human thinking patterns might introduce to galactic society. Admiral Hayes addressed these concerns during a holographic conference with Galactic Council leadership. His enhanced appearance with obvious cybernetic implants and biomechanical interfaces made many alien representatives visibly uncomfortable. But his words were measured and diplomatic as he explained humanity's position on the future of galactic civilization. Humanity would share their anti-devourer technologies and tactics with any species willing to learn, but they would not force changes on unwilling populations. The galaxy could choose to continue fighting the ancient enemy with inadequate methods, or it could embrace the hybrid consciousness technologies that offered genuine protection against future invasions. The final battle for the galactic core took place above the Council's capital world, where the largest Devourer fleet had gathered to consume the seat of galactic government. Human forces arrived through dimensional gates just as the enemy began their final assault on the planet's orbital defenses. The battle would determine whether galactic civilization survived or joined the countless species that had been consumed. Over the millennia, Commander Nicole Rodriguez led the assault on the Devourer command ship, a massive vessel that seemed to be the source of the psychological warfare that paralyzed enemy opponents. Her boarding parties consisted of heavily enhanced humans whose consciousness had been so thoroughly integrated with artificial intelligence that they could function normally even while surrounded by the enemy's fear-inducing technology. The battle inside the Devourer command ship revealed the true nature of humanity's advantage. The enemy entities were not just technologically advanced predators, but parasitic consciousnesses that required predictable thought patterns to maintain their existence. When faced with minds that could think in ways that were simultaneously organic and artificial, logical and intuitive, the Devourer consciousness began to collapse from its inability to process the contradictory mental inputs. Dr. Carter's final analysis of the enemy revealed that the Devourers had evolved to prey specifically on civilizations like the current galactic community. Species that maintained rigid boundaries between different types of consciousness were ideal food sources, because their thinking patterns were predictable and consumable. But humanity's hybrid evolution had created minds that were toxic rather than nutritious to the ancient parasites. The destruction of the Devourer command ship triggered a cascade failure throughout their entire fleet. Without their central coordinating consciousness, the remaining enemy vessels became confused and vulnerable. Human forces systematically eliminated the scattered survivors, while galactic fleets finally managed to engage effectively against opponents who were no longer operating at full capacity. President Aaron Smith addressed the assembled Galactic Council from the rebuilt human embassy on the capital world. His speech was broadcast throughout the galaxy as humanity formally announced their return to interstellar civilization. But the terms of that return were very different from humanity's original membership decades earlier. Humanity no longer sought acceptance as a junior species learning from more advanced civilizations. The exile and isolation had transformed them into something unique in galactic history, a species that had successfully bridged the gap between organic and artificial consciousness while retaining the unpredictability that made them effective. Against enemies like the Devourers, the new Terran Federation would establish diplomatic relations with any species that wanted them, but humanity would never again submit to the kind of rigid regulations that had once limited their development. The galaxy had learned that diversity of thought and approach was not a threat to be eliminated, but a strength to be cultivated as protection against future crises. As the first human colony ships prepared to establish settlements in star systems throughout the galaxy, the universe seemed larger and more full of possibilities than it had been in centuries. The species that had been erased from history had returned not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners in a galactic community that finally understood the value of the chaos and creativity they brought to every situation they encountered.